Okay, let's dive into a fascinating and, frankly, pretty radical idea. We're going to explore an author's bold claim that the ancient Vedas aren't just religious texts, but are actually scientific documents. And he's not just saying they contain some abstract wisdom. No, he's arguing that they're a literal scientific guide to the very nature of reality, a blueprint for the entire universe, hidden in plain sight. So what is this revolutionary idea? And if it's so profound, why is it supposedly so hard to wrap our heads around? We're going to unpack his argument step by step using his own logic. Let's get into it. The whole thing really starts with a philosophical puzzle. It all kicks off with a direct challenge posed to the author about what the Vedas actually are at their most fundamental level. So the author gets challenged on this exact point. See, he describes the Veda mantras as being like waves of thought. Okay, fair enough. But if they're waves, then that's an action, right? In philosophy, that's called kriya. So how can they also be the fundamental substance of the universe, the dravya? You see the problem, right? How can something be both the movement and the thing that's moving? It feels like a total paradox. So how in the world does the author get around this apparent contradiction? Well, his answer is built on a really simple but powerful analogy that is the absolute key to understanding his entire argument. First, we gotta quickly get our heads around two different kinds of causes. You've got the nimitta cause. Think of that as the tool or the doer, like a sculptor's chisel. And then you have the upadana cause. That's the actual stuff that something is made from, like the block of marble itself. So the big question then becomes, can something be both the tool and the raw material at the exact same time? And according to the author, the answer is a resounding yes. How he explains this? Well, that's what unlocks his entire perspective. Here it is, his big analogy. Think about a wave in the ocean. Is a wave really a separate thing from the water? Of course not. A wave is just vibrating water. The action, the vibration, and the substance, the water, are totally inseparable. They are one and the same thing. In the exact same way, he argues, a Veda mantra is simply vibrating mind substance, or manas tattva. It's both the action and the substance all at once. And just like that, the paradox is gone. Okay, if the core idea is that simple and elegant, why are his books and the Vedas themselves seen as so impossibly complex? Why do they have this reputation for being so difficult to get through? Well, the author has a very specific diagnosis for why we're so confused. He points to a few things. First, the texts themselves. You know, they were trying to cram infinite knowledge into just a few symbolic words, and they were kept super short for memorization. But over thousands of years, the oral tradition that actually explained it all, it got lost. And then he makes his most controversial point. He claims that we've changed, that there's been a massive decline in our ability to even comprehend these ideas. And he really doesn't hold back on this point. He argues that this decline in our intellectual and spiritual capacity is exactly why we get these modern interpretations that he considers completely wrong, commentaries that have buried the original science under layers of what he calls foolishness. So this brings us to the author's crucial point. He believes we are trying to understand these ancient scientific texts with a completely wrong set of tools. We're just not equipped for the job. He uses this really sharp analogy to make his case. Imagine an expert in grammar trying to debunk a physics paper because they don't like its sentence structure. He says that's exactly what's been happening with the Vedas. So from his perspective, these wrong tools are things like focusing only on grammar while totally ignoring the scientific context, or not having a scientific mindset and the ability for rigorous logical reasoning. But it's also about internal stuff, what he calls impurities, like ego and envy, that actually block real insight. He believes that without a scientific mindset and a clear head, a modern scholar might have the linguistic key, but they've no idea what door it's supposed to open. And he extends this critique to popular religion today, too. He suggests that the modern focus on just telling stories, performing rituals to get wealthy, or other superficial practices has completely missed the original point, which he believes was a rigorous pursuit of scientific and spiritual truth. Okay, so he's laid out all these problems. But what's his solution? What does he actually propose as the way forward to rediscover this lost knowledge? He actually outlines a pretty clear 4-step path, and it's a real synthesis of ideas. First, develop a scientific way of thinking. He even says you should study modern science to build a foundation. Then, you do the internal work to, as he puts it, purify the self. And finally, you have to engage in continuous, tough, rigorous practice. You'll notice this is not a path of blind faith. He's calling for serious intellectual and spiritual work. And this is important. He argues that this isn't just some abstract theory. He claims to have real evidence that this new blend of science and spirituality is already creating a genuine, growing movement. He points to some really hopeful examples. Highly educated young people who are choosing this path instead of lucrative careers. He talks about physicists and international scholars who are wanting to collaborate. You've got scientists who are starting to learn Sanskrit, and on the flip side, Sanskrit experts who are diving into science. He sees all of this as the very first signs of a major revival. And this all builds to his most powerful and maybe his most controversial final thought. It's an idea about the role of belief itself in this whole process. Now here's the twist. He suggests that, not everyone needs to achieve perfect, deep understanding, at least not at first. He claims that if the general public could just develop the faith, the simple belief that this incredible scientific knowledge exists within their scriptures, that belief alone could be powerful enough to spark a massive cultural and national revival. And that leaves us with this final, really provocative question. It's about the complicated dance between faith and reason, between belief and discovery. Is it possible that the very first step to rediscovering lost knowledge is simply to believe, against all the odds, that it was there in the first place? Definitely something to think about.